When 2,500 Marines leave the Pacific and begin sailing toward a war zone, the official statement is always the same. This is a precautionary deployment. This is a deterrence measure. This is not an escalation. But the ships moving right now tell a different story, and the oil market already knows it. The USS Tripoli is currently underway. An amphibious assault ship, not a carrier, not a destroyer, an assault platform. A vessel specifically engineered to put Marines on shore fast, under fire, in a contested environment. It is not a diplomatic signal, it is a military instrument, and the fact that it is now cutting across ocean toward the Persian Gulf, carrying nearly 2,500 Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, tells you something that no Pentagon press release will. The United States is no longer managing this conflict from a distance. This is the moment that matters, not just because of the ships or the Marines or the orders signed by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. This moment matters because of what it reveals about where the Iran conflict has gone and how far it still has to go. The deployment is being described as a reinforcement. In strategic terms, it is something closer to an acknowledgement. An acknowledgement that Operation Epic Fury, the U.S.-Israeli military campaign that began on February 28, 2026, has not delivered the deterrence it was designed to produce. And now the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow channel through which roughly 20 to 25% of the world's seaborne oil supply passes, is an open disruption. Oil prices have crossed $100 per barrel. That number is not just a market statistic. It is a pressure gauge, and right now it is reading very high. To understand why this deployment is significant, you have to understand what was supposed to happen before it became necessary. Operation Epic Fury launched at the end of February with a clear strategic premise. Overwhelming force applied to Iranian military infrastructure would force Tehran to recalculate. U.S. and Israeli aircraft and naval assets struck over 15,000 targets across the campaign's opening weeks. The logic was familiar. Strike hard enough and the adversary backs down, protects what it has left, and stops threatening the waterways. That logic has not held. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy continued its harassment and interdiction operations in the Persian Gulf. Missiles and drones kept flying. Shipping companies began routing vessels away from the strait, and the oil market responded exactly the way energy markets respond when the world's most critical choke point becomes a combat zone. Prices surged by approximately 40% from the moment hostilities began. The deterrence campaign created exactly the kind of economic disruption it was designed to prevent. That is the context in which CENTCOM requested this deployment. The United States Central Command does not formally request a Marine Expeditionary Unit unless the operational picture demands it. The 31st MEU is not a symbolic force. It is one of the most capable rapid response expeditionary packages in the American military inventory. Its ground combat element is built around a Marine infantry battalion. Its aviation combat element carries helicopters, MV-22 Osprey tilt rotors, and F-35B stealth fighters, aircraft capable of operating from a ship without a traditional runway. Its logistics element is self-sustaining across a wide range of mission types. When this unit moves, it moves ready to execute. Embassy reinforcement, non-combatant evacuation, maritime security enforcement, direct amphibious assault, all of those options are on the table the moment the Tripoli drops anchor in range. Washington has not said which option it intends to use. But the presence of the USS Tripoli in the Persian Gulf changes the geometry of every scenario currently on the planning table. There are already more than 50,000 U.S. military personnel committed to regional operations connected to this conflict. Carrier strike groups built around the USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Abraham Lincoln are already positioned in the region. The addition of the 31st MEU and its amphibious platform does not change the raw numerical balance. What it changes is the type of power available. Carrier aircraft strike from altitude. They destroy fixed targets. They project air power. A Marine Expeditionary Unit does something different. It projects the ability to physically enter a space, a coastline, a port, a building, a compound, and operate on the ground under contested conditions. That capability distinction is not accidental. Someone decided this specific type of force was needed. That decision alone tells you something about how CENTCOM is now reading the threat environment. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply a geographic feature, it is the single most consequential choke point in the global energy system. At its narrowest, it spans roughly 21 miles. Through that corridor flows a daily volume of oil that keeps industrial economies in Asia, Europe, and beyond operational. Japan, South Korea, India, China, all of them depend on uninterrupted flow through that passage. When Iranian naval assets begin operating aggressively inside or near that corridor, the disruption is not regional, it is global. Shipping insurance premiums spike. Tanker operators alter routes. Supply chain managers begin recalculating delivery timelines for everything that moves on refined petroleum. And then the price of oil does what it has already done. It breaks through the barrier that central banks and finance ministries had hoped it would not. Brent crude above $100 per barrel is not just an energy story. It is an inflation story. It is a monetary policy story. It is a political story in every country where fuel prices appear on election year balance sheets. The International Energy Agency and governments holding strategic petroleum reserves face a familiar and uncomfortable choice. Release reserves to stabilize a market that is reacting to a war that has no clear end date, or hold those reserves for a scenario that could be worse than the current one. Neither option resolves the underlying problem. The underlying problem is that a conflict without a visible off-ramp is sitting directly on top of the world's most important energy transit corridor. The Gulf Arab states are watching this with a particular kind of alarm. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, these governments have spent years managing their exposure to U.S.-Iran tensions while protecting their own production and export capacity. A sustained military conflict that keeps Hormuz in a state of operational disruption directly threatens the revenue streams their governments depend on. Their silence in official statements does not reflect indifference. It reflects the calculation that being publicly close to any side of this conflict carries its own risks. But their private communications with Washington and their coordination with international shipping bodies are active. The economic pressure is landing on them too. For Iran, the strategic calculus is harder to read but not impossible to analyze. Tehran is absorbing an extraordinarily intensive air campaign. U.S. and Israeli forces have reportedly struck more than 15,000 targets since Operation Epic Fury began. The fact that Iran has not ceased its maritime operations despite that campaign is itself a signal. It suggests that the IRGC Navy's harassment posture in the Gulf is either operating from assets that have survived the strikes, or that Tehran has made a deliberate decision to absorb military punishment while keeping economic pressure on the United States and its allies through oil market disruption. If that is the strategic logic, it is not irrational. Every day that Brent crude remains above $100 is a day that the economic cost of this conflict lands on American consumers, on European energy importers, on Asian manufacturers, and on the political calculations of every allied government that Washington needs to maintain coalition coherence. That is the deeper dimension of what this Marine deployment represents. It is not simply a reinforcement of kinetic options. It is Washington's signal that the campaign will not be abandoned, that the investment already made, 50,000 personnel, 15,000 targets struck, will be defended with additional force rather than walked back. The political logic is understandable. The strategic logic is more complicated. Adding amphibious assault capability to a campaign that has already failed to produce decisive deterrence does not automatically produce a different outcome. It expands the range of options. It does not resolve the fundamental problem, which is that Iran has chosen to absorb punishment while keeping Hormuz in play as its primary lever. There is a deeper structural issue beneath all of this. The United States has committed to a campaign defined by Operation Epic Fury, with no publicly articulated end state. The deployment was authorized under executive military authority, with no specific congressional authorization cited. That means the political framework governing this conflict is, at its core, a unilateral executive decision being defended and expanded by military deployments ordered without formal legislative mandate. That is not an accusation. It is a description of the current legal and political architecture. And it matters because it shapes the domestic political sustainability of a conflict that, based on oil prices and shipping disruption alone, is already extracting measurable economic costs from the American public. The USS Tripoli is still in transit. The 31st MEU has not yet reached its operational position. The full composition of its amphibious ready group has not been confirmed publicly. The exact rules of engagement remain classified. The specific mission objectives for these Marines, evacuation, security, direct action, or something else, have not been disclosed. What is known is the trajectory. More than 2 weeks into a campaign that was designed to deter and degrade, the United States is adding its most flexible ground combat-capable maritime force to a theater already holding 50,000 personnel and 2 carrier strike groups. That is not a sign of a campaign achieving its objectives on schedule. The Strait of Hormuz has been a strategic choke point for decades. Every American military planner, every oil market analyst, every energy security strategist has modeled what happens when it is genuinely threatened. The models have always shown the same outcome: global economic disruption, oil price spikes, inflation pressure, and political instability radiating outward from the Gulf into every economy connected to global energy supply. Those models are now running in real time. The price on the oil futures screen is not a forecast. It is a measurement. And what it is measuring is the distance between where this conflict was supposed to be by now and where it actually is. The Marines will arrive, they will join a force already at war. And the question that no deployment order, no press conference, and no strategic briefing has yet answered is the one that actually determines how this ends. At what point does Iran decide the cost is no longer worth the leverage? And at what point does Washington decide that more force has reached the limit of what force alone can achieve? Neither answer is visible yet, and in that gap between military commitment and strategic resolution, the oil market will keep telling the truth that official statements have not.